Okay, so with this video we're going to pick up where we left off looking at the orbit of the moon. So we were on this slide as a little bit of a review that the moon takes about 27 1/3 days to make one complete orbit around the sun, but a lunar cycle takes 29 1/2 days. Okay, so we look at the orbit of the moon here. As we look, the moon is going to take 27 days to make one full circle around the sun, and when we look, as it's taking those 27 1/3 days, it does come one full circle around the Earth, but now the Earth in relationship to the sun has moved because the Earth is orbiting around the sun, and it's going to take the moon about 2 more days, or a little bit more than 2 days, to get back to the new moon phase, which would be a complete lunar cycle. So that's why our lunar cycles are 29 to 30 days, and it only takes the moon 27 days or so to make one full orbit around the Earth. The other thing is the moon's orbit is slightly different than the Earth's orbit. The angle between them is about 5 degrees different, and that's why we don't have an eclipse every month. If the moon and the Earth were on the same orbital plane, we'd have a moon every month. But because of this difference of about 5 degrees, the moon is sometimes above or below the intersecting line between the sun and the Earth, or the line of sight with the sun and the Earth. The moon moves about 13 degrees eastward along its orbit each night. So if we look at it, it's going to take the moon 360 degrees to go once around the Earth, and it's moving about 13 degrees eastward. That's where we get a little bit more than 27 days for the moon to make that complete cycle around the Earth. And then if we look, it has to travel a little bit further in those extra 2 to 2.5 days for it to get back to that full lunar cycle. The moon rises about 50 minutes later each day and sets about 50 minutes later as well. And that's just letting us know that we don't see the moon the same time each day. Sometimes the moon is out during the day. Sometimes we'll see the moon not out during the day and it'll only be out at night. Sometimes we don't see the moon at all because of its change in its orbit here being 50 minutes later each day and the different phases of it. It's an elliptical orbit. Its average distance from Earth is about 384,000 kilometers. Just like the Earth, it does have a perigee and apogee. The moon is at its perigee or closest to the Earth, and apogee when it's furthest away. So just like we talked about the Earth being closer to the sun in January than it is in July, the moon does the same thing with its elliptical orbit around the Earth. Some of the effects of the moon on the Earth. Many societies throughout history thought of the moon as a god or goddess, with the sun kind of watching over the daytime and the moon watching over the nighttime. The moon was used to explain many naturally occurring phenomena such as rain, stars, fertility, sickness, disease, famine, infertility. With the different phases of the moon, there were different beliefs. There were different stories, with Rona and the moon, where, in different civilizations, if you ran off at night, you can get captured by the moon, and you would then be taken away from everybody else, and you wouldn't be able to see any of your friends or be with your family any longer. So there were all different kinds of myths and tales about the moon and the effects of the moon. Even currently, we still look at the moon as a major contributing factor to objects or events that happen on Earth. So we associate the moon with madness, mayhem, and romance. Words like the moon, for its name, comes from the Roman lunar or luna, and we look at words like lunatic and mayhem and madness. That kind of are the word etymology kind of comes from the moon. And we look at even like month comes from moon, so our months are very, very closely associated with that lunar cycle. And then romance, there's different books and movies, the Twilight series, so there's still some effect, or the moon at least having some psychological effect on the Earth. Some more physical effects. Okay, the moon gives us a look into the past events that happened on the moon billions of years ago, can still be observed today because the moon, again, does not have an atmosphere. Its gravity is too weak to hold on to air molecules. There's not going to be wind or weathering and erosion, so the moon is essentially frozen in time. The gravity of the moon does affect the tides on Earth. Earth goes through 2 high tides a day, the side of the Earth that faces the moon and the side of the Earth that faces away from the moon. Go through these high tides, and the sides perpendicular to the moon would experience low tides. The other big effect of the moon on Earth is it keeps us tilted at our 23.5-degree angle. And that 23.5-degree angle is very, very important because that's what allows us to have seasons on Earth, and it maintains the predictable cycle of those seasons. So if we didn't have the moon, the angle or the rotational angle of Earth could change slightly, and that would definitely have an effect on our seasons and how long they'd last, or in what order they would come in, and how severe the change in the seasons would be. So with the moon, it kind of keeps us tilted at that 23.5 degrees. And ending up here with the phases of the moon, talking about its appearance as we see it from Earth. The moon does not emit any light of its own. It's almost like a giant mirror in the night sky where it just reflects the light from the sun back down to the Earth. The moon is in orbit around the Earth. The sun always shines on half of the moon's surface. Any of the planets or solar objects that are around, the sun is only going to shine on half of them at one time. Now the sun does, while it shines on half of the moon, the moon is what we call phase locked and always faces the same side towards the Earth. So the dark side or the far side of the moon is not visible from Earth, but it gets just as much sunlight as the side that points towards Earth. And the only reason, again, we would refer to it as the dark side of the moon, or sometimes it's almost misreferred to as the dark side of the moon, is because we can't see that side from Earth. We see the different phases of the moon, and we have the 8 different stages. Stages 1 through 4, we're looking at the new moon, the waxing crescent, the first quarter moon, the waxing gibbous moon would be the first 4, and then stages 5 through 8 are almost those same stages, but just kind of in reverse, so the opposites, if you will. So opposite of the new moon would be the full moon, and we'd start there, and from the full moon then we would go to a waning gibbous moon, then to a third quarter moon or a last quarter moon, and then finally to a waning crescent moon. And those would be the 8 different stages that the moon goes through. So that kind of finishes up our information that we talked about with the moon. If you have any questions on the moon, please stop by in class and ask.